What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Dynasty Underdog. Billy here. I do not have Uriah with me as always, but I do have Jake with me. It's good to have you back, man. It's been a minute. How you doing, Jake?
Doing well, dude. Yeah, it has been way too long, but happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome, and really excited tonight. I'm not just with Jake. We also are being joined by one of my favorite people in the industry, an AD Mitchell truther, Anthony Richardson truther before that, a man who just stands on business like no other, content creator for Dynasty Football Factory, Ben Winkler. How you doing, brother?
I'm great. That was quite an intro, man. That you were hyping me up a little bit too much, but yeah, I do love those guys, and I do love Dynasty football, and I'm ready to get to chatting about this stuff. So
hell yeah. And it's no shock I brought on another film bro, right? Like that's what we do around here. And we're gonna get into some fun stuff tonight. We're gonna talk about some redraft versus Dynasty ADP, which I think is fun because it allows us to, I think, look inward a little bit, see kind of maybe where we are making some mistakes in our evaluations, right? Because sometimes we get ahead of ourselves in Dynasty, and I think the redraft community can sometimes reel us back in a little bit, just a little bit. So I think it's going to be fun looking at that. But before we do, I do want to talk to Ben a little bit about himself, about kind of his process when evaluating players and stuff like that, because we haven't brought Ben on really, and I don't think everybody knows that much about Ben and kind of what he's really about, right? So I do want our listeners to find out a little bit more about what you do, kind of your thought process. So let's kind of start there, right? Let's start there. Let's start with rookie evals because I said we're film bros. That's kind of that's our bread and butter, right? And so I've been bringing a lot of people on talking about their scouting process. I've been refining mine, talking about kind of, I've been asking everybody, do they evaluate attributes or are they like charting? What exactly is the process that you're going through when you're evaluating a player? Like, how did you come to your AD Mitchell love, right? Like we can get more specific, as we go through the show, but like, what does your process look like when you go to break down a player?
I'm not going to lie, having me talk about my process a couple weeks after having Matt Waldman on and then having like Jagger on a couple weeks ago, that's a pretty tough follow, I will admit, because I still really view myself as like one of your guys' listeners just as much as I am like in the industry, as you've said. But, I'm still 20. I'm coming up on this. This was my first real year trying to hunker down and like start to refine my process a little bit. And I think I did really good. So the main thing that occupied my time this rookie class was the DFF rookie guide, which they brought me on as the QB film analyst, which was Jagger's thing last year. And he did an amazing job with it. So I inherited his grading model. And they were like, you're welcome to tweak this however you'd like. You can make it your own. You can totally throw it out. Like this is your film eval now. And I kept a lot of it still quite the same because it's not really rocket science at the end of the day. It's still football. But this was my first year evaluating based on a really like defined set of traits. And next year, I'm hoping to get that down to more of a number crunching kind of deal. And I want to actually give a number grade to those traits. But this year was more keeping stuff in mind. And I obviously doing quarterbacks, a lot of it, I sort of divided it up into pocket stuff, out of the pocket stuff, like natural gifts, which was like focused a lot on their throwing ability. And obviously there's a ton more nuance to that. You can get into like arm elasticity. You can get into actual velocity. You get into like range and touch. There's just so much that goes down to it. So my notes were really like what I stuck to and how I always have stuck to my evaluations. And then as a film guy, I think that to try to refine your film analysis into analytics is the ultimate goal of watching tape, is that you want to find a way to quantify what you are seeing with your eyes. So for me, that's the goal next year, is to be able to say, okay, I gave Caleb Williams like a 4.7 on his blank trait. And then I can actually point to that, model it in a weighted sort of method and crank out like a hard grade, which is my dream, is to create with this at least, is to create a grading model. But yeah, that's pretty much the ramble on how this year went for me and what I've been doing and how I sort of go about it. I usually try to watch somewhere between like 2 to 6 games per prospect. Kind of varies by position. Sometimes it's a lot more. Sometimes I don't need more than one. Usually you go for at least 2, but sometimes, especially with like running backs, you can just turn on a game and kind of get a sense of who that player is. But yeah, that's my film. That's my big film ramble on what I'm doing right now.
I mean, no, that's great stuff. And from my perspective, I mean, if you've been listening to the show, been listening to the Waldman episodes and all those other ones, then you're definitely going about the process the right way. It sounds really similar to kind of how I built my process up, starting, with something else and then kind of slowly adding in all, my thought process in there and kind of just, it's an amalgamation of different things, but you're making it your own. And I love you talking about like arm elasticity and all that. I know you're really grinding, throwing out those terms like that, right? Like I know you've been grinding hard.
Yeah.
So no, it's really cool to hear though. You build that process out, and you're saying you've had situations where you watch just like one game of a player and kind of like how you feel about that player. You think?
Yeah, it doesn't happen a lot. And it definitely doesn't happen with quarterbacks, but it happens with other positions, I think. And it's usually like you watch a game of a running back and you can tell that they struggle in pass protection, but they're really agile. And you're like, okay, I think I know who this guy is. And for me, I won't like linger on a prospect like Bucky Irving. I didn't watch more than one game of Bucky Irving this year because I saw it. I was like, okay, he struggles in pass pro. He's insanely agile and really good at making guys miss. But I know what that is. And like, I know what kind of bet that is. We'll see what the draft capital is. We'll see what the combine looks like, but I'll just wait. I'm not going to watch more tape on him. I'm going to focus on something else.
Love that.
Sort of how I go about that. I it's definitely like, I'm not going to say it's a pure vibes kind of thing, but like with that, I'll try to measure it out, like how much I need to watch kind of based on the vibe.
I didn't want you to feel like I was roasting you. I was going to throw some vibes-based analysis language in the intro with you because I do think that there's some of that with you, but that's not a bad thing. Like sometimes that fits. You know what I mean?
I think it's a forgotten element of fantasy football.
It definitely is. This is an interesting comment though. Quantifying arm elasticity is wild as fuck, which I think is an interesting comment from AJ, just getting to kind of 100%. The difficulty of quantifying some of these things that we're looking at, right? It's like, it's a challenge. It really is.
Yeah. I created like the template this year of like how I would want to make my grading model sort of look like. And I had all my traits listed on the top. And then like, I had all these boxes ready and I was just staring at it like, oh my God, like there's no way I'm going to be able to put a number on every single trait for all these guys. Like and then Matt Waldman came on and pretty much described exactly doing that. And I was like, wow, like how is that even possible that like he can see like literally what that comment says? How do you watch someone throw a football and say that is a 4 out of 10 elasticity throw? That like that's the goal, obviously.
It is.
That's why we're all trying to get to, but yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, like at some, like he's doing it at a very, very granular level. And he's obviously grading it like game to game and using it that way. I think you can also do it on, an attribute scale too, which is kind of how I've been doing it. And it is a challenge though, because like you'll sit there and you're like, okay, in your head, you have to kind of define like what a 5 is and what a 1 is, right? And you're like, where, and those are very challenging and they can be very subjective things, but you have to try to define them very clearly, I think. And I do think you can literally define them in sentences and it helps you, like if you have a definitions page and it'll help you kind of, rein yourself in so that you're not kind of just, shooting random shots whatever prospect you're looking at and
exactly.
Then, end up on some kind of weird grading scale. But you talking about the one game thing reminded me of Ben Sennett, because when I watched him, I mean, there was probably only one game to watch of Ben Sennett. There wasn't much out there, but it was quick, right? It was like, okay, this guy, he has the body type. He has the aggressiveness. He has all kind of everything. It was just like all there in a package. You're like, yeah, I don't really need to see that much more of this guy. I mean, I want to, because I want to make sure it's there, but that was a guy who stuck out to me like first game. I'm like, oh shoot, this is real.
For sure. Okay. Even Caleb Williams is like that too, where like you can watch one game of Caleb Williams and you know what he is. And like, you don't have to watch more, but obviously you should, but you don't have to. It's sometimes good talent stares you right in the face and people ignore it too often.
Yeah. And this is something from AJ. AJ's actually spitting some good stuff here, but vibes equals gut instinct. And this is one thing that's worth touching on, because I do think there's a factor of people having good, just, a good eye test. They have good eyes, right? They know what they're looking at and they're able to see it, right? And they have good gut instincts. And sometimes you do have to kind of trust that if you do feel like you have, a good set of eyes and understanding the game and understanding what you're seeing quickly, kind of like we're talking about here, right? And it's not going to happen every time and you're going to be wrong, but there are going to be those situations where you're like, damn, like this is just, he's one of those guys and he plays really well. And I think that's a part of film analysis that we hate because it's not really quantifiable. And that I think that really gets under a lot of people's skin who aren't necessarily film grinders because it's hard to get into that headspace, I think, if that makes sense.
Definitely. It's hard to like explain,
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
It's one of those processes too that I think over time it becomes more natural, or maybe your process started when you were really young, trying to learn the sport yourself. Maybe you were playing it. Maybe there was a position that you necessarily handled better than others. Things like that will kind of become that natural process that I think a lot of people don't necessarily have, right? They don't have that past experience with the sport itself. And so it doesn't happen as naturally. And so I think that for a lot of people that ends up being a more analytical approach to the game because they can kind of hone in on that. Whereas they see a large pool of players, especially if you start from a Debbie pool into a professional pool, and you're saying to yourself, how do I wean this, multi-thousands of players pool into a much smaller pool? How do I end up evaluating that pool into who's going to actually land in the NFL and succeed? It's a little bit more challenging when you don't have that past experience to say to yourself, I can see these things, whereas the visualization ends up being through data.
Absolutely. And that's where data comes in so handy, is because you can really easily filter out the elite producers. And the thing about good players that have good traits is those are the guys who produce. Yeah. And at the end of the day, we're all looking for the same thing. We're all looking for production when we're playing fantasy, at least. So either way, you don't have to overthink it. You can filter by most receiving yards and you're going to get a bunch of good prospects, or you can grind through the tape and you're going to get probably the same group of good prospects.
Yeah, no, I love this conversation. And I do think we can sound a bit snobby and like the eye test, and some people have it and some people don't. But I think what Jake is explaining is a really good way to get at it, and a good way to get everybody kind of on board, where it's like the eye test is really helpful, I think, when you have a lot of that past experience and you have you have definitions kind of set to where already what you're looking for and your eyes are already trained, right? So you are able to pick these things out more quickly and easily. And it's not that I'm better than you. It's not that I have something you don't. It's that, or maybe I do have something you don't, but it's not that it's something that you can't have. It's just something that's been trained and you may not have gotten there, right? And we focused on that. But it is a real thing where I do think that, we talk about vibes, but I think it's more than that, and it's just hard to explain sometimes, which is why I really like doing like the film. I love doing like the film rooms and stuff like that, because it allows you a platform to kind of explain yourself better and say, look at what I'm looking at right here. This is what I'm talking about, and this is how I'm quantifying it compared to others. Okay, sorry, we went off on a tangent there. So we were talking about building that experience. So actually, I want to know, you're a young dude, and I do want to say, I think that Ben is one of the sharper football minds coming up in the industry. I really do. I really trust his film evals, and I like talking through the stuff with him because I do think he gives me great insight. So I just wanted to put that out there. But I want to know, because you are younger, and also our listeners probably don't know, where is that evaluation skill set built from? Like, why do you feel like you know what you know? Did you play? Is there anything in your past? Or are you just like an absolute nut for football? Is that all it is?
I grew up pretty much surrounded by the sport. Like I can't tell you the first football game I watched because I don't remember it. I was too young. So like my dad had me like, not like holding a football out of the womb, but he definitely had a football game in the background, like when I'm like a week old. So it's just been a part of my entire life. I am a former player. I played in high school. I was originally just a basketball player, and then just like Devontae, my junior year, I was like, nah, we're switching to football. Didn't end up having a career like Devontae, but I did have my fun. I played defensive back my junior year, and a little bit of receiver. And then my senior year, I was a full-time slot receiver. I literally had an interaction with my head coach. I sent him an email because this was during COVID. And I was like, what's up, coach? I had just met him like a couple days ago. I was like, I just want to let you know, like, I know you're looking for like headhunters and stuff like that. And I was like, that is not me. I was like, if I was a couple inches taller, I probably would be trying out for quarterback. Like I'm playing slot because I'm quick and like I like to read the field, and like my favorite route to run is like a stick route. Like I was a very cerebral football player, even when I was like in high school, just like kind of trying to have fun out there. Like to me, in my opinion, a slot receiver is your second smartest player on your offense. Exactly like Devontae, bro. Yes, literally. Where like that's my pro comp. I wore 17 too, so it just keeps getting better. Yeah. So I am a former player. I have just been watching my whole life, and then the last like few years, pretty much ever since I got picked up by DFF, I started to take this seriously as something that I could like actually do something with. And my mom is always telling me that I'm spending too much of my brain power on football to like not go into some kind of football career. So the last 2 years have been really just being a student of the game. And like, I absorb so much information. I watch a ton of tape. I watch a ton of YouTube and podcasts. And I just like, I'm kind of obsessed with it right now for sure. It's like, it's a massive hyperfixation for me. And one of my goals for the summer is I'm going to do one play per day that I would add to a hypothetical offensive scheme if I was building one. Cause that's my ultimate like dream would be to like get into like play calling or personnel or something like that. So for this summer, I'm really trying to lock in on just like improve, like deepening my knowledge and like actually getting familiar with how you would want to balance an offensive scheme, how you'd want to call a game, stuff like that. And so just a ton of tape cranking recently, and hopefully we'll have that series starting soon if I end up making videos out of it or tweets. But yeah, that's sort of the journey of my football watching, fan first, player, and now trying to take it to the next level.
Yeah, that's really great stuff, man. I love talking to you about this. You can hear the passion, man. Kind of obsessed, yeah. Kind of obsessed. Okay.
Yeah.
No, but the cerebral thing really stands out because I think just the way that you approach the game, to dissect the game now, like you can tell that is definitely how you approached it as a player. You know what I mean? And that background really helps. So I mean, that's really cool stuff, and I really appreciate you walking us through that.
Of course.
It's really, really cool. Okay. So let's move on here a little bit. Is there a position when you're evaluating these players that you feel least comfortable with? Because you were talking about doing the quarterbacks, but I mean, maybe that's it. But is there a position you feel least comfortable with?
I'm probably least comfortable with tight end because I think that I have the most experience watching quarterback tape at this point. Like that's definitely where the majority of my hours are, just because I find it the most fun tape to watch because you pretty much can watch everything and you're getting a sense of the entire game. So I really love watching QB tape, and because I love it, I've watched enough to the point where it's no longer a struggle, and I do feel like I know what I'm looking for. But with tight end, it's sort of a little bit of everything. Like you need to know how to analyze blocking, and you need to know the blocking schemes really well, or else you're going to miss the full extent of how good of a blocker someone is. You can't just like watch a couple plays and be like, oh, he pancaked someone, he's a good blocker. You have to like see how consistent he is about not missing assignments and stuff like that. There's just a lot of nuance just in blocking alone that I think that I don't feel super confident in evaluating with a tight end. But the receiving side of tight ends is a bit more intuitive to me. I have experience playing in a similar role to that even. And I've also obviously watched slot and tight end guys a ton my whole life. So I feel like I know what I'm looking at. I know what kind of routes I think are important for those positions to be able to run. But overall, tight end, I think the difficulty translating from college to the NFL for tight ends makes it an even tougher eval, because it's just it's just generally difficult for them to match the physicality jump, because tight ends are, when you're a receiver, you go into the NFL, you're playing against corners who are also just like similar SEC guys who you've been playing your whole career. Or maybe it is a jump for you if you're coming from a smaller school. But any tight end is going to step into the NFL and have to chip Myles Garrett or TJ Watt or Micah Parsons. Like every tight end who comes into the league has to like rock with that like top end athlete, that like total freak of nature, like you have to block that guy. You have to help block that guy. And a lot of tight ends just like aren't able to do that. And those are the guys who I think kind of struggle to stay on the field. So yeah, that would be where I stand on like ease of evaluation, just because I think the translation there is really tricky for tight ends.
That makes a lot of sense. Jake, since we're on the topic, what do you think is your toughest position to evaluate?
Yeah, I think this is probably pretty common, but I'll say quarterback, honestly.
It is,
okay. I think quarterback is one of those positions specifically where 5 different guys can look completely different in terms of how they throw the ball, how they stand inside the pocket, how they move around the pocket, how they move outside the pocket, how they throw across their body, and just general vision. And they can all be equally successful in the NFL. And like, for me, that really comes down to so much more that I don't understand from like general, I guess, fit of scheme for individual talent. So you like, I think a prime example of that would be someone like a Brock Purdy. I know it's obviously an extreme situation, but like even when I was watching his tape in college, like I didn't think anything that great of his skill set, but he just naturally fits into the 49ers scheme so well that it just feels so natural, if that makes sense. But I would never in my mind feel like I need to, own shares of an extremely cheap quarterback like him, given his own performance in college. Whereas someone like Jake Haener this following year, I feel like I thought that he could be kind of that same mold, and he probably won't get a sniff in the NFL. And that's just kind of the reality of that process that I find myself kind of getting pulled from, that I don't really know kind of the best route for those, medium tier quarterbacks that find themselves getting drafted in the NFL.
Yeah,
for sure. That's a really good point.
Yeah, that for sure. I mean, I feel the same way, and I think it's a lot to do with the other positions. I think you're really able to evaluate the players off of physical attributes, and that's not the case for quarterbacks. It's just there's so much more to their game, and that's a lot harder to dissect, read, understand what they were trying to do, Absolutely. All that stuff. Like almost on any given play. Yep. With a running back or anything, you know what they were. So you can pretty much slow it down and be like, I know what you were supposed to do here. Right. For the most part, like obviously you can be wrong sometimes and follow your blockers, all that stuff. I know what you were supposed to do here. With a quarterback, you're like, I'm really not sure. I don't know if that was your first read, second read. You know what I mean? I'm not sure if that's where you were supposed to look, if, the defense told you something, all these different things. So I do think it becomes such a challenge with that. And like Jake's saying, like you can love late round quarterbacks, but it's like, it also takes the perfect situation for Brock Purdy to fall into an offense like Kyle Shanahan's, where he's even willing to give him that chance and knows that he's going to be protected by everything around him. There's a lot that goes into the quarterback position. So I was asking that though, because I know that some people have trouble with running backs and all that kind of stuff. And I'm always interested in to kind of talk to people on kind of what the challenges are they face with each position. But
definitely. And I just wanted to add that, sorry, I'm low-key blanking on what I was going to add. Talking about, I think quarterback, like this is no hot take that I'm bringing in, but like the fact that quarterback is the most like situation dependent position also makes it a very tricky eval, is because you just think about this year, JJ definitely got the best landing spot. He got the offensive play caller, which I think is the most under talked about aspect of a quarterback's career trajectory and their eventual fantasy success, because this is still a fantasy podcast at the end of the day, is like getting a guy like a Kevin O'Connell, or just having someone that you're able to build that rapport with, and then he learns how to call a game for you and you learn how he likes to call a game. And that's when you actually like end up, in my opinion, with a dominant offensive like run and a dominant like career for a quarterback, is when you get that. You have to have the pairing, in my opinion. That's another reason why I'm so hyped about Richardson and Steichen. But I think that when I watch quarterbacks, I'm looking for like, okay, what do you do well? And then I'll make the decision on who I want to draft based on who has the best pairing with an offensive mind. That's how I like to approach it.
That's definitely an interesting approach. And it's funny that, Tom Brady making his rounds now or whatever, it just reminded me of him talking about how the continuity with with Josh McDaniels and having the same or similar playbook over a long time, how important that was in their success, and like just highlights, I think, what you're talking about 100%. Here, when you can get those guys locked in together. If Anthony Richardson and Steichen can lock in together, it could be a problem for the league. So I do think that, and a problem for, your fantasy opponents if you roster Anthony Richardson. So I do think that is a really good point and something that we should be keying in on and paying more attention to. One thing, actually, I don't think I talked to you about this, Ben. I did send this over to Jagger, and I've been talking to Jake about this. I do want to send it to you too now that I'm talking about it. But I built out a little bit of like a coaching database, a coaching scheme database, because this is something that I feel like is like so underappreciated, under talked about, underlooked at. Nobody knows where to get the information. There is no freaking place to get
data
all the
on coaching. Yeah.
So I basically created, a list of all 32 play callers, I think, is essentially what I did, and, try to get their schemes written out, defined, and I'm going to try to add a little bit more to it from a statistical standpoint, but kind of, just what you were talking about there made me think about like the need for that, and why I'm doing it is because, it'd be nice to be able to go, okay, X play caller is getting X coach in 2025 or whatever. What is does the style fit? Does it make sense? You know what I mean? Is this going to work out, and that kind of thing? So I will pass that to you, and we will talk.
I definitely need you to send me that.
Yeah. Billy's trying to turn into the Peter Howard of coaching schemes.
I do not want to be that guy. That seems like a heavy weight to carry.
That really reminds me of just like the analogy of like Dynasty as like investing in stocks. And I think what we're describing here is the players are like investing in an individual company and watching the shares of like the price of that go up and down and trading based on that. But trading based on an offensive scheme is like trading based on the industry, like buying into tech stocks because tech is good. Like right now, the equivalent of that would be like the Shanahan, like McVay scheme, the like zone running and like West Coast offense. Like that is like the tech stocks right now. So when you're making your dynasty investments, if you can think about it in like buying, it's
such a
C2C. Dude, this the new C2C exposure that I'm getting in that league, Billy. It's easily the craziest league I'm in. Like the trades in there and the rosters are just like wild. I have no idea what to expect from that league. For some context, I just joined my first C2C league with Billy this spring, I guess. We just drafted it recently, and it was just crazy. And I don't know, that's a whole nother can of worms. But what I was trying to say is like, if you can think about investing in schemes, like just like good offensive schemes that are hot and making your decisions based on that, I think that's a sneaky thing that people don't think about as much. But those are the like investing in the right offense while it's in vogue is a really nice way to think about like acquiring fantasy points for your roster, I think.
I think that's a really good point. And the only thing I would add to that is to understand what the window of success looks like for those players, because incredibly efficient offenses typically don't pay those players well, because those schemes work so well with whatever talent they have, i.e. Brock Purdy, right? And so you find yourself where if a player hits a certain... once they hit a certain level, i.e. Brandon Ayuk, right? Like you're stuck here with a top-end asset. You think they're going to continue to perform really well, but now they're kind of stuck in another situation where if they leave that offense, I'm not saying Brandon Ayuk won't perform as well in another offense, but if he doesn't, you're now stuck with this asset that you kind of allowed to appreciate to a certain point and then weren't able to get off of now that they're no longer in that, to your point, sector that they no longer were working in prior. And I think that's kind of really important. The reason I was thinking that, I was thinking of the Tom Coughlin era wide receivers. I know it's really far back for folks, but I'm thinking of guys like Mario Manningham or Steve Smith. There were a bunch. Hakeem Nicks. You could even say Odell Beckham. Like,
low-key.
Folks that fell out of that offense, funny enough, basically faded away into oblivion. But yet, I think a lot of people saw their leaving of the Giants, which wasn't necessarily a historically efficient offense, was for the better. And in a dynasty landscape, that wasn't necessarily the case. So just something to be mindful of.
And probably more often than not isn't the case, right? Like the next landing spot is not always that beneficial. Like, it can be, and that we've seen success, but I think we've seen a lot of stumbling along the way. So that's
all this is to say, I just think that having an understanding of like the different sectors, which are what we'll call the offensive schemes, having an understanding of the different ones is going to give you such a huge edge when you're evaluating how a player can produce in a given year.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're going to dive more into that. We'll probably have to bring you back on to talk about the coaching DB a little bit and some fun stuff, the ins and outs of that, details in there. That'd be really cool. But Paul Patterson, the Pure Potential YouTube channel, he'd be proud of you with that analogy, brother. Come on, man. That was a good one.
Yeah.
That's right up
Paul
his alley.
Definitely. I don't know. I think that guy is awesome, and I don't know.
He is. Shout out to Paul, having a lot of success with the YouTube channel.
Crazy, dude. Yes.
Yeah.
Shout out to Paul.
Yes.
His analogy bag is insane, though.
Yeah, he is. He's been reaching in the bag heavy lately, and it's been working.
Yep.
So shout out to him. Really, really cool seeing the success over there. Love that stuff. All right, we're gonna move on a little bit here. We said at the beginning of the show, actually, I think in the title of the show, standing on business. That is what Ben is about. But we're gonna hop into one of his player takes of 2024 right now. AD Mitchell. We can talk about why AD Mitchell and how early you're willing to take him. Because I do want to say before we get into it a little bit, Jake was saying how he's kind of an AD Mitchell truther with you. We've done some rookie draft reviews of our listener leagues, and we've had some very, very early selection of AD Mitchell. I think even like a 112 of AD Mitchell. And we've given some I think, maybe harsh feedback on that. But I'm wondering how high you're willing to draft AD, and if maybe even if that's too high or if that's reasonable to you. So I guess, just take us through the whole AD Mitchell experience, brother.
For sure. So I love AD Mitchell. Like, there's no secret. He's the first player I've ever put in like my username on Twitter. Like, I have Adonai Mitchell enthusiast right now up there. I've never done that. I swore I would never do that, but it felt right for this instance. So I have not taken AD Mitchell personally before a Superflex 204. I have not been overspending on him. I love him, and I'm just scooping him up at cost. So I'll tell you where I've drafted all 7 of my drafted AD Mitchell shares out of my 10 leagues that had rookie drafts. I took him at the 204 twice, the 205 twice, and then the 206 once, the 207 once, and the 208 once. So I'm getting him right where he's going. And to me, that's why my exposure is so high, is just because like right when I get to that tier, which for me is the 202 to the 207, where I'm like, all right, this is AD Mitchell range. I just wait wherever I am. And I'm like, if he falls to me, I'm taking him. If not, I'll diversify. It's great. Like, I need more Leggett. I need more Keon. I need more Penix. If AD gets sniped, he just got sniped in my home league the other day, and I took Leggett, and I was like, you know what? That's totally fine. I do still think it's a similar bet as far as like playing the hit rates and like their college production. Obviously, it's not there for him. So I try really hard not to lose my head in my leagues when I'm losing my head on Twitter about someone. So the AD Mitchell hype over there, I don't think is as extreme as it might seem. I think that I have been pretty reasonable with it. But as far as why him specifically, he was my wide receiver 5 pre-draft, and I try really hard now not to let the draft affect my takes too much. And to me, him going like borderline top 50 is kind of what I expected. I definitely thought the higher end of his range of outcomes would be like going around the 20th pick. Like, I was so praying the Colts were going to take him in the first, or I wanted them to take BTJ, actually. BTJ was my pre-draft wide receiver 4. And then they passed on both, obviously. And then they got 80 in the second, and I was so excited about that. So to me, you have a complete package receiver with like very few flaws, and the flaws that people do bring up about his tape to me are extremely trivial. Oh, he shows a lack of effort after the catch. Yeah, he makes a lot of diving catches and doesn't try to get up after them. Like, I definitely think that he leaves some yak on the table. I'm not going to argue about that. And then the other flaw of him like lacking effort on routes, to me, that's so silly. Like, he's like, there are clips of him talking about it. It's because he can like diagnose a coverage. And if you know the route that you're running, if you're running a post against cover 3, you know you're not going to be open. I'm not mad at you for like half-assing it a little bit if you know that the look is going to be somewhere else, right? So as far as his flaws, I think they're silly. I think that his traits are overwhelmingly, obviously ridiculous. Like he does everything that I want a receiver to do well. He does it well. Like he runs good routes and he catches everything. And then he's also a crazy athlete. You can figure out the yak later. Like just look at this like specimen of a receiver who has all of these high-end traits. And like, I don't know. I just think people are overthinking it a little bit with the stats and then with the second round draft capital. But the other things that he hit were an offensive play caller and a young, potentially elite quarterback. Yeah. Even like no matter what you say about Anthony Richardson as a thrower, you can't deny that the ceiling isn't there and that the high level elite throws aren't there. Like it's on tape. Like he did it in the NFL. The consistency obviously has to get there, and that's where he can take the next step. Is if he learns how to work the short game the same way he's able to work some of the crazy stuff he does downfield. If he can just really hammer that down, and I think Shane Steichen's going to be huge for that. That's when I think that offense kicks it into the next year. I genuinely think the Colts' ceiling as an offense with this group is like best offense in the league, kind of good. That's why AD. There you go.
That's great. Yeah. I just wanted to ask a quick question. It's not on the show sheet, but honestly, just because I know you're so locked into AD and I just thought of it, AD is probably one of the only players that I saw this offseason getting hit by a smear campaign about his personality and, basically how he's not going to fit into NFL locker rooms pre-draft. Do you think there was any specific reason the media was going after him and not anyone else this offseason? Because it felt like it was just him. Jermaine Burton straight up punched someone in the stands, right? No one talks about Jermaine Burton. Yeah, but yet, AD's, a villain, and it was kind of weird.
I truly have no idea why it seemed to be just him. I think that part of it is that when people see such a lackluster analytical profile, they'll look for anything to confirm, this guy is not going to make it in the NFL. And like a character concern would be one thing that you could cite as like a potential lose condition, if that makes sense. But yeah, no, I don't like you said, that's crazy.
Burton is just passionate. Yeah. AJ, I'm reading the sarcasm through the screen for sure. AJ.
I love that, bro.
Oh my goodness. I mean, Go ahead, Ben. Sorry.
No, it's all you.
No, I think to Jake's question, I think that also it might be that AD is an easy target with kind of the things that you can go at him about. And also he has a teammate, Xavier Worthy, who you can't poke as many holes in. So it's easy to look at his counterpart and go, but why not? Like, why didn't he do all these? You know what I mean? And so I think it's just kind of he seems to be an easy target.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Jermaine Burton stuff kind of, that doesn't make sense that he's not, you haven't really heard anything about that situation. So that is something to think about. Real quick. So I made 2 trades for AD Mitchell because made me think of a whole bunch of things, but on the film evaluation side of things, I was actually really high on AD Mitchell, like higher than most of the players. Like he was like 7th, I think, in my film grades, like very, very high up. And I think
his tape is really good, bro.
It's really good. And it's really tight in that range. But I wasn't as in on AD Mitchell as you were for some reason. But I think I got in my own head a little bit with like all of the stuff that is surrounding him with like all of the questions, concerns and all that. I'm like, well, like he did fall to the second. I thought he was going to be
exactly the draft capital. Yeah.
And you're like, but then, I feel like I reined myself back in a little bit like, okay, now he's being undervalued. I feel like by the community to an extent, right? Like in the middle, late second, in the 3rd round, even I'm finding him fall. I'm like, it's ridiculous not to buy into a guy who I believe is extremely talented on the field. So I'm just talking about that because I think it's hard. Maybe it's not hard for everybody. I think it's easier for you to stand on your takes, right? Like you have your takes and you're like, that's it. And for me, like I'll have these takes about like Dell, about Puka, whatever, AD this year, who I'm like, damn, he was really good on tape. But I won't always buy into it. And I just think it's a hard thing psychologically to like hear all the surrounding stuff that everybody else is saying and block it out. As much as I want to be unbiased, which I think I do a pretty good job of, it still seeps in and it's tough, man. It's tough. So, I mean, I made 2 trades and I think these are good ones. What do you think about this? Because I'm saying this because I think I was trying to kind of right the ship for myself in like, let me get some shares, let me get in on AD so I'm not fully out like I've been in the past where I miss. I traded Zamir White straight for AD Mitchell, and I also traded Jalen Warren straight for AD Mitchell.
That's amazing, dude.
Those feel good.
That's such a smash. Like, I don't know. Those are where we're talking about like low RB2 ceiling on those guys, like maybe RB20, and you're pretty happy with Zamir. And like, I don't know, man. AD to me looks like there are not that many guys who have the ceiling to be an elite wide receiver 1 in the NFL, and he has that ceiling. And I think that when you watch the tape, it's not like hiding from you. Like, all the traits are there, and you just like when you have that kind of upside. And to me, the landing spot is pro like growth for him. I think it feels like the stars aligned for him, in my opinion. And that drop was going to be like the best thing that's ever happened. He could have got taken anywhere in that second round to some like middling team with bad quarterback play and a bad offensive play caller. But no, he landed on the Colts with Shane Steichen and Anthony Richardson. And to me, as soon as that happened, I was like, I don't care if he went 10th of all the receivers. Like, he was my wide receiver 5 and he got a good landing spot. I'm not going to overthink it. And like you said, I stood on business. Like, I was like, if you guys want to push him back into the second round, I'm just going to scoop him up every single time. And I'm fine with that. To answer your question, by the way, which I realized I didn't explicitly say, I would take him as high as the 112 if I felt I had to. But I know he's available later, so I haven't done it. And that's it.
Love that.
And that's our advice too, right? Like, and that's like generally our advice to our listeners. It isn't about, taking him at the 112, because I don't think he'll ever, reach that value potentially. It's more so about in the market, especially it was, I believe, the day after the NFL draft, right? Like, we had started our rookie drafts basically immediately in DU leagues. And so for me, you already knew that the draft capital was kind of plummeting his value for people in general. And there just didn't feel a need to reach that high when in some of our other DU leagues, he was going as late as like the late second, right? You're talking like 210, 211. So that juxtaposition just doesn't really make sense to me when I'm trying to acquire assets, especially when I know that exists. And if you're sitting there at the 112 and you want AD Mitchell bad enough, like, I'm for it. Just know that it comes at an extreme cost that you might not be able to pay back for probably the first 12 to 18 months, right? Like, I've seen even in your commentary on Twitter about like what his ceiling looks like year 1. It's realistically not that high end, right? Because it's just more so about how he's going to actually adapt to the NFL as well as that offense. And when we're thinking about, what his value looks like 6 months after the NFL draft, it's realistically going to either stagnate or decline just based off of usage, I think, more often than not. So why would you stick yourself in a situation where you're going to potentially be acquiring some type of depreciating asset is kind of the way that I look at it at the 112, when you could probably end up finding a way to acquire a 2025 first with that 112, because there are so many people so high on that pick in this draft to begin with. So why not go that route, in my opinion, than, AD Mitchell and then try and trade up in the second for him, something along those lines.
There are two things, in my opinion, that kind of boil it down. There are better things to do with your 112, and there are cheaper ways to get AD Mitchell. And that is part of the fun with him, is that he is a low cost, extremely high upside bet. And I don't know. I also think the risk isn't as bad as most people think, which is why I appear to be so much higher.
Yep.
Yeah. Fortunately, the risk is baked into the cost, right? Like, that's essentially what's happened at this point. So that Jake nailed what I was getting at, is that it's not, that you, the cost, like where you took him isn't the problem. It's that you could have just gotten him later, and you probably could have moved back, picked up value, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of different opportunities there. Okay. So we're talking about standing on business. We're talking about, player takes, and these are hard conversations, right? So because I think that they can be used against you. If somebody knows that I love a player, they can potentially use that against me, right? So what are you? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, that's definitely. I really don't think anybody's taken too much advantage of that with me. Probably because I've gotten all the shares, and they can't now sell them to me for a premium. Yeah. But no, I haven't seen that one used against me too much. But what are your thoughts on being like overly in on guys like an AD Mitchell for sure, and getting burnt by misses, right? And being overweight on those shares, or being taken advantage of by your league mates? Have you seen any of that happen? Are you worried about that, or you just like, I don't care, like I'll be able to navigate around my misses?
We're all in like a really interesting spot with this question, I think, because of how much we broadcast our, especially the three of us, our film specific takes on guys. That ends up being like, oh, this guy, this is his guy, right? Like, oh, this is his guy. I can go make a crazy offer to Ben for AD because like that's his guy, and I know he'll overpay for it. So for my philosophy on that, I try really hard to generally stick to market value when I'm evaluating a trade offer, and I try to like I it's always a big question, but yeah, I do try to win every trade. Like that's usually my goal. I don't like to take value losses, even if it's a guy I really like. So there's a point where I am willing to overpay, and I will do it when I'm willing to overpay. I can read some of my AD Mitchell trades, by the way, so you guys know the absolute like ceiling price that I'm willing to do.
Yeah, sure.
So
that's definitely
so before the NFL draft, these are the only 2 shares of AD that I've traded for. Before the NFL draft, I traded Keon Coleman and a depleted Devy 25 first for an AD Mitchell, and that was like super bold, like hella like planting my flag stand. That was the first time I really did it with him too. And then obviously the draft capital makes that look like a horrible trade. And I want that first back. Like I could have flipped them 1 for 1. And then the second one was after the draft. I traded a Brian Thomas Jr. for an AD and a Jermaine Burton on top.
That one's not bad. I like
so that. They're both pretty reasonable. And like I was saying, I don't like I'm not just going to give up a ton of value because someone knows that they've got my guy. Like Jag in one of our leagues together in the Rizball League, I've offered him Josh Allen for Anthony Richardson and a plus like multiple times, and he hasn't even like sent a word back. He just declines it. He doesn't even like. I don't even know if he reads the offer. He's just like, I'm not giving you like Anthony Richardson and a plus for Josh Allen. He's like, if you want him, you got to come off of that.
He wants to make you
pay. I know that's what he's thinking exactly. So like it definitely. I know it seeps in ways that I might not realize, but by keeping the market in my head sort of level when I'm trading versus and like trying to compartmentalize that from when I'm evaluating someone allows me to like really get in on a guy as my opinion without having to get overly invested on them in Dynasty, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's a really good way to keep a level head with these things, especially when you have strong player takes like that. You always have to keep the market in mind. I think that keeps us a little grounded. Okay, that's good stuff. So let's finish off the rookie eval talk here with one rookie everyone's too low on.
One rookie everyone's too low on. I think people are really low on Drake May, like lower than they should be.
Love it.
I'm not saying he needs to be the 103 or the 104, but the fact that he's like the 107 and sometimes the 108, and I've also seen him at like the 109 before if someone gets cute and wants to take Worthy over him. I think that that's super silly. I think that like a lot of people are trapping themselves too much in the Mac Jones comp for him, and they're not thinking about like forget the helmet scouting. Like this could be more of like a Jordan Love situation where like he has this young wide receiver room and like he's able to come in and maybe struggle a little bit, but like once he figures it out, like that's the kind of player I think he could be. He's got a lot of similar traits, high-end arm talent, in my opinion, a good processing ability. He's a better runner than a guy like Jordan Love. So it's really just like, I don't know. I think that people are sleeping on how complete of a player he is. I don't think Drake May has a ton of flaws. Like I think that he's actually already coming in like a really solid NFL ready kind of player. And I'm really excited to see what he does. He's my most owned rookie quarterback. So big Drake May guy.
I love that take actually, because I do think that he's been faded way too far during this rookie draft cycle. So I do like that pick. All right, so one more before we hop into our redraft first. Dynasty ADP. Give us one rookie who is going to make people regret the selection.
I saw this on the sheet and I was thinking a lot of them I don't think are going to be like regretful picks. Like I think that this class is really going to show out. I think that the 2024 rookie class hype was worth it. I think that these guys are really ready to come into the league and make an impact. But I'm nervous about Trey Benson and I'm nervous about Bo Nix more than I'm nervous about any other prospects in this class. Those are two guys I haven't clicked once because at the end of the day, if I think Bo Nix is a future backup, which I do, I'm just not going to spend a first round pick on him. So I just haven't clicked him once. And then as far as who's the other guy I just said?
Benson.
Oh yeah, as far as Trey Benson goes, I also am just uneasy about coming into the league with no defined role ahead of you and spending an early second on that kind of bet. And because he's going like 204 and up, to me it's like sure there's a chance that he could oust he could push Connor out after a year or two, but I think James Conner's a really good football player, and he seems to be on a cheap contract right now. They probably won't have to pay him a ton after. I think that reminds me, like he could be like Darrell Henderson and just come in and back up. And he could just come in and back up James Conner for a couple of years, and then Connor gets another contract, and Benson is still kind of like overshadowed. I'm nervous about it. Yeah,
Darrell Henderson cop.
So I don't know. Darrell Henderson was also a third round pick.
I know.
It's scary. So Benson scares me, but I get why people are high on him because there's definitely upside there. And Bo Nix, I'm more confident. Like I'm just not taking Bo Nix. As a Raiders fan too, it's so easy for me now to like think Bo Nix is trash. Like I'm so excited because Max Crosby is going to eat that guy alive, bro. He's going. That's. I don't know. I think that's going to be like the most uncomfortable like defensive end quarterback matchup in the whole league next year is going to be Bo Nix having to like stare at Max Crosby across from him like 2 times a year.
It's going to be a problem for him. It's going to be a problem for him for sure. Yeah, people are excited about Bo Nix. That one I'm not as surprised about. Trey Benson is the one I'm a little bit more surprised about. For that one, I just haven't heard too many people worried about kind of his role. And I've heard a lot of people thinking, he could push James Conner. But listen, I've been on the James Conner train for years, probably before most were. So I can understand that take, honestly. Like he is a really good player. Injury obviously is what could potentially push Trey Benson into a greater role early on. So that's the only thing that I think that can get him there, and why I'm not as worried, because I do think he has a couple pathways to success. It could be his own talent. It could be, Connor injury, that kind of stuff. But Bo Nix, I can see making a lot of people regret that early second or that late first round pick. That
Benson, I do want to say, I do think he could be a good player for sure. And I'm not like super like, oh, everyone who takes him is going to regret him. But it's more that I just think it's a bit of a lower percentage bet than people might realize at that cost. And there are just a lot of guys I like more around there where he's going. Like I definitely am not taking Benson before Penix. And I feel like he usually goes before Penix. So,
and if you're forced to, and if you're forced to, I'm sure you'd go AD Mitchell too if you had to make a pick in that mid early second.
I probably have taken AD over a Benson and like not even realized it, because usually when he's there in that range, I just like click it and don't even look.
You're like, I'm not thinking about this twice. Yeah,
pretty much.
The only thing I would ask, and just because I do think it's kind of similar situations, maybe even slightly more challenging because he's competing against another young running back, would be Blake Corum, who is probably in that like 2 to 3 pick range away from Trey Benson, depending on the draft board itself. What is the differentiation for you in terms of your fear of that value drop between like the 202 to like the 205 or 206 of potentially the same circumstance happening to Blake to Trey?
You're right. That is something I honestly hadn't thought about that much. For me, I'm definitely not taking Corum where he's going either. But the truth is that I just kind of hate running backs right now in general. And like my whole Dynasty portfolio totally reflects that. Like
I'm man to my heart. I'm the same way.
I'm so underweight on all. I have Jalen Wright as my starting RB2 on a like actual competitive team right now in one league, just because I haven't found a way to fill that slot yet. But I'm definitely like, I'm an anchor RB guy. Yeah, exactly. I know I will. I just like, I'll figure it out. It's not something I'm stressed about right now.
That is the strategy around here. Don't worry about it.
Literally. And that definitely reflects in my opinion on the class. So I have like 1 or 2 Corum shares that I've taken in like the early third when he's dropped that far. Wow. But I won't take it higher than that either.
That makes sense.
So I'm Benson to me is the more intriguing fade because he's like a little pricier, but you're right. Corum is definitely a similar bet. Honestly, probably a lower percentage bet. He's an older back with a younger back, whereas Benson is a younger back with a much older back. Kyron definitely, I think, or Kyron, Corum being with McVay is so sick. And like the potential of having a McVay RB1 if someone gets injured to me is a lot more exciting than the potential of having like the Cardinals RB1 if someone gets hurt. So I almost think that Corum's potential ceiling is higher, but Benson is more likely probably to be a relevant player, like a consistent fantasy relevant player. So I don't mind Benson over Corum, but I don't like either.
Fair enough. That was great. Thanks for the reply. No, I think that's awesome.
And also I think you're lower. I mean, I know a lot of people are low on the running back class, but you seem to be even lower, or at least willing to just say you guys can take the shots or take the bets. I'm not going to.
Yeah.
I'll figure it out.
I also zero Jonathan Brooks. I'm looking at my sheet right now. I have not spent a second round pick or higher on a running back this year. It has all been receivers, quarterbacks, tight ends. Like I've taken Sanat with a couple seconds, but I've taken Jalen Wright with a third. I've taken Corum with a third. I've taken Lloyd with a third. I've taken Vidal with a couple thirds. But I'm not touching the more pricey guys. I just think the receiver bets there are a lot better. There are just so many like high upside guys. I love AD, but there are like 8 or 9 guys too that I'd be just as happy with before I have to start taking a running back.
Yeah, I think that's actually kind of a good strategy in this class. I mean, I do think that you're probably going to end up with more hits that way than not. Though I know that we talk about not fading the running backs because they can offer so much, help year one for production purposes. But I do think that we're getting a little head over heels, maybe jumping the shark a little bit on the Blake Corum love and him being able to take over such a role there. And like, there's a lot of uncertainty there. So those are definitely.
I definitely might eat this to the face, fading these running backs. Like I might like this might be like it might be like out of nowhere. I could get totally wiped. Like Brooks could be a top 6 guy. Like there are definitely some ceilings here, but I have chosen to block this RB class out of my mind because none of them to me are like exciting enough players to where like it's worth trying to convince myself that I like them. So like I'm going with my gut again. I'm trying to stand on business as has been the theme of my analysis so far. But
love it. All right, with that, we will jump into the redraft versus Dynasty ADP. Again, really, this is just more so to, I think, challenge ourselves kind of on our thought process about where these guys are going. I have a couple players highlighted, and we'll just talk through it, I guess, a little bit. I'm going to pull this up on the screen here. Okay, so we're going to keep away from the wide receivers because, the rookies, because obviously they're going to be ridiculously high in Dynasty versus redraft, and I don't really care about that. We know that. But we can, touch on guys like Tyreek Hill or the Jalen Waddles, Devonta Smith. So I got all these guys highlighted here. And we can just pick out whoever we want, really. But I guess player I kind of wanted to start with was George Pickens. Okay, I wanted to challenge our thought process a little bit from a dynasty perspective, having him at 36 range overall, whereas redraft has him 56 overall. So not as high on this situation as the dynasty community is. Why are we so high on Pickens from a dynasty perspective? And I guess what could be the challenges that we're not acknowledging right now for him?
When I look at this ADP, the first thing that jumps out at me is T. Higgins, Zay Flowers, and Tank Dell behind George Pickens in dynasty value. And that doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. The truth that I think here is that George Pickens is a little overvalued in dynasty right now. I think that people have almost like reverse flipped it to, I do think he was undervalued at one point, and now a lot of people seem to think that like, oh, he's alpha wide receiver 1 in the Pittsburgh offense. It's still an Arthur Smith offense. It's still a Russell Wilson offense. It's still potentially a Justin Fields offense. So I don't care if he's the wide receiver 1. I don't really want that much to do with him. So for me, I think the answer lies somewhere in the middle of those two numbers. As for why people are higher on him in dynasty than redraft, maybe that's why. Maybe it's because there's optimism that this year is as bad as it's going to be, and then the offense will improve as they try to adjust their quarterback situation and try to adjust their play calling. If that ends up being a problem, like maybe Arthur Smith he's been a good OC before, or maybe he like makes it work there. I think they'll have a great running game, which is another reason I'm kind of nervous about investing in George Pickens. But yeah, that's just, I didn't know his dynasty ADP was that high. That's crazy.
Yeah, and
that's really my takeaway from this.
Yeah, right. And just to be clear, I think that's a great breakdown, by the way, but just to be clear from where this data is pulled from. So the Dynasty ADP is from Dynasty League Football, their most recent ADP, which is pretty good stuff usually. And then Redraft ADP it's like a conglomeration of like Underdog ADP and like all the relevant like Redraft ADP. So I actually think it's probably pretty reflective of like what is actually going on, just so to be clear for the people listening.
And it's one QB too, which is really important to state.
Yes. We're not, because there's no real good redraft superflex ADP anywhere. Yeah. So and honestly, like the quarterbacks are a whole different market. We don't need to be worrying about that. So yeah, this is really, we're only talking about the skill position players here.
What do you guys think about Pickens? So I want to hear your takes on this.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I sold Pickens in I think I sent this trade to you guys, to you, Paul, and Chris, and I was struggling moving Pickens for Josh Downs, Rashee Rice, and Tyjae Spears, right? Which seems like a pretty goddamn good bet to go grab 3.
I do remember this, yeah.
Pretty high-end players for one player, but I just feel like, I guess I'm stuck in between these ADPs a little bit here. I'm stuck in kind of like that Dynasty ADP, and I'm playing the market, right? That's really what it is for me. I'm like, his value is a top 36 pick. Like I should be able to get like a ton for him. And is Rashee Rice, Josh Downs, and Tyjae Spears, which are really all kind of like okay players, is that really enough to bail on the George Pickens? So that's kind of like where my mind has been at on George Pickens. I don't personally think that he's as good of a player as everybody else does, clearly, based on that ADP, that Dynasty ADP. But just coming out, I wasn't the biggest fan of his. I do think I was probably a little too low on him. I think he's a pretty good player, but I don't think that he's like a dominant wide receiver 1 talent. Like I just don't see that on a play-to-play basis. That skill set, I don't see that being there personally. Jake?
Yeah, no, I'm in a similar boat. I also recently traded him in a 14-team Superflex. Bo Nix Pickens for Garrett Wilson. I thought I smashed that.
Love that. Love that.
Trying to get off of my only share left of Pickens. Honestly, I've been pretty out against him probably since he's been in the league. I really do think that separation is incredibly important in the NFL, and we really hone in on those statistics, especially like the advanced metrics in college, which I don't actually think are as important, funny enough. And we can get into that on a different day. But specifically here with George Pickens, I just don't see that this second or now third change of offense for Russell Wilson, second change of offense for Justin Fields turns into a productive year for either of them in the NFL. It just doesn't seem reasonable to me, and I really don't want anything to do with any of that offense, to be honest. Like I acquired 100%. Pat Freiermuth at like really, really low value. I think I got him for a third.
He's cheap right now,
but like even I'm not excited about, right? Like we're talking about players in which I want to stay away from. I think, Ben, you brought up a great point with regards to their running offense. I think the rushing game is going to be incredibly productive. I think you'll probably see Najee and Jaylen Warren being kind of skyrocketed into some fantasy value for maybe like 6 to 7 weeks and then kind of fade away because they'll probably won't be able to hold their legs that long throughout the season. But that's kind of where I see the Steelers offense this year, just strictly from change of scheme for the entire team, plus, key players within their offense being brand new to the offense just doesn't give me a lot of confidence.
I think it's nice that you brought up the offense as a whole, because I also made a similar decision earlier in this offseason. I pretty much said to myself, I don't want any reason to have to watch the Steelers on any given Sunday. So I moved off every Steelers share I have, because I don't if the Steelers are playing and I don't want to watch the game, I don't want to feel like I need to turn it on to see how the fantasy guys do. So I don't want to watch the Steelers.
That's too good.
I'm with you.
I do want to say that Jake's trade is what I would have preferred to do with Pickens.
Bro. For real.
It's really tier up. And I think maybe sometimes maybe I didn't put enough work in or try to seek out like a different trade partner, or, just send out trades like that, like a Pickens plus whatever for elite asset or elite type asset. But Jake clearly does a very good job of that, and that was a really good trade, and that's what I think I would have preferred to done. So anybody trying to move Pickens, that would be, I think, the route to go, the goal. I'm going to throw one more out here from this list. I mean, I have other ones, so I can go after that too, but if anybody wants to jump in after me, feel free. This one is going to be Davante Adams. And I think it's kind of going the other way a little bit that I want to talk about it. Like, are we a little too low in Dynasty? We're talking about a Dynasty ADP of 42nd. Oh, God, the resident Raiders fan here. A Dynasty ADP of 42nd overall in that range. And then we're looking at 15th for redraft. Today we're in the second round for redraft, which is, this is a really big gap in ADPs here and differences between the two formats. So, yeah, I mean, you know what? We'll give it to our guest here, Ben. What do you think about Davante Adams? Do you think we're too low on him?
He's definitely like way too cheap in Dynasty, and if I don't know where you guys kind of stand on him, but if you don't like Davante right now, like, you should like him. He's gonna be. I don't know. What my goal for the Raiders this year is, I would love if our quarterback is a wide receiver 1 spammer, because I think that's our easiest path to having an efficient passing offense with.
Get Gardner Minshew in there, baby.
Exactly. Gardner Minshew would be a fantastic wide receiver 1 spammer, and I think Aiden can get there too if he puts in the work this offseason and really starts working that chem. Like, we could see some real numbers from Davante. And obviously, like, a 31-year-old, 32-year-old wide receiver is never like a fun bet to make in Dynasty, but I think that his ceiling is a lot closer to like similar production as like Tyreek Hill next year. And he's not drafted as if that's what his ceiling is. And I get
2 or 3 rounds later.
Yeah, exactly. I get being concerned about the Raiders offense as a whole. Believe me, no one is more concerned about it than me. But I think that Davante specifically stands out as a underweight Raider in the Dynasty landscape. I don't think Brock is too cheap. I don't think Zamir is too cheap. I don't think Jacoby's a little too cheap. But Davante is definitely like cheaper than he should be, because we're the Raiders, which is fair.
I mean, that's probably most of it, but I do know that there's some data out there about 31-plus-year-old receivers, and the decline comes pretty quick for them. That said, I did trade a second-round pick for Davante Adams early this offseason. Feel great about that. I love that. That really reflects, I think, his ADP. So, yeah, I'm all in on that if you're a contender for sure. I do want to just put out there, I'm pretty sure I looked up the splits recently. Not that, like, there is that the quarterback situation was bad last year, no matter what, for the Raiders, but I think he was as good, if not better, with AOC than he was with anybody. So just kind of putting it out there, if it was AOC, like, it's still going to be, I think, okay for Adams, as long as he doesn't hit like some terrible age cliff. So if it were Minshew, I think we could see like a pretty big, not season, I don't know. I think on a week-to-week basis, you could see some monster games from Adams. I mean, we saw last 100%. Year him with those 7 to like 12 target games. Like, you see that. I mean, he's going to have a really good season again. He's going to outperform this ADP. How do you feel about it, Jake?
Yeah, honestly, I was just looking through the list, and for me, I just think I can get similar production for someone potentially around later, especially in redraft with like Mike Evans. I think you're not that far off. You're probably killing yourself with maybe like 1.5 to 2 points per game if you're playing full PPR. And like, you're talking about 15 compared to 26. Like, for me, it just comes down to ranges of value. And I just don't know if that's where I want to be acquiring Adams, even in redraft. But by all means, like, he's a type of player that I think if you do play with enough dynasty heads in redraft, you can easily take advantage of that. And that's kind of the way that I try and play redraft now, especially because I've gotten more and more friends of mine in home leagues into Dynasty. Like, you want folks to start thinking the wrong ways, which is really ironic because I just did a redraft mock yesterday, and Billy ate me alive because I basically drafted the second half of my team as, you know, all of the high-end wide receivers that I want in the rookie class, right? And it's just like, what's the reality that all 6 of them are going to hit? Yeah. Like, it's just, I
mean, my comment back,
you're gonna get one.
That's a lot of rookies.
Yeah, I'm gonna get
a lot of rookies.
Like that start 11, I'm gonna get maybe one of those guys in there, and so like
it could be a lot more than one, but you're right. It
could be, but Maybe it'll be 2. But regardless, like I think that's kind of the way I'm looking at it. Back to Billy's point, that if you can acquire, I think Billy even got him for like a late 25 second or even a 26 second. It might have been a 26 second.
Yeah.
Like it was crazy value. If I can acquire Devontae for that in Dynasty, I'm going to. Redraft is a little bit more challenging to kind of maneuver through because the value cliff kind of just drops off, right? Like if Devontae doesn't hit in the first 3 weeks, you can't get rid of him. Like you have to own that asset basically throughout the rest of the season. And most redraft leagues, you know, they'll hit you with a trade deadline at like week 7 or something like that. You know, it's weak as shit. And so you're just kind of dealing with that kind of thought process. And I'm personally scared, once again, an additional offensive change from what was going on with, you know, the extreme chaos, I guess you can call it, of mid-year McDaniel firing and then going into as AOC's rookie year. Like, what does that really look like this year? Is there stability in that offense for anyone to really succeed? Yes, I think it's Davante Adams. He's probably the only asset in that offense right now that's worth acquiring, potentially at cost, but I'm still probably a little low personally.
I agree with a lot of what you said for sure. And I think, the redraft comparison is the biggest thing. So I'll pass it to you, Billy.
No, I was just going to say redraft ADP breaks my brain. That's literally what I was going to say, because it like Dynasty ADP, like when you look at them in their orders, Dynasty ADP actually like much more reflects what's happening in the NFL and like what is going to happen. You know what I mean? Obviously that's the intent of it, of course, but redraft ADP, I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Devonta Smith at 15th overall, you know what I mean? Or Devonta Adams at 15th overall. Like it doesn't compute as well for me, which is probably why I don't do as well in like redraft overall. That is just like harder. Like it's more, it's obviously more random bets, and it's you know, there's a lot more going on there. So that's why I look at this and I don't think to myself, like, what would I do in redraft? I'm just like, is the redraft market telling us something that we're missing? You know what I mean? Or vice versa. That's kind of how I'm viewing it. Because Jake, when you're talking about like what would you do in redraft, I'm like, I don't even want to think what I would do in redraft.
literally.
That's literally like what my brain. That's why I just went on that tangent just now.
I'm looking at it right now, and Travis Kelce goes at 27. How is Devontae at 15 and Travis Kelce is going 27? That doesn't make any sense to me. Like they're like the same bet pretty much, and like Travis is on a better offense. Like I don't know. But like I would think that Devontae would be higher in Dynasty and Kelce would be higher in redraft, but apparently Devontae's higher in both. That's very surprising to me.
Which is strange for sure. But I think the way that Jake was breaking it down at the beginning, talking about trying to take advantage of your opponents, like I do think that you should try to key in. Talk a lot about here about trade strategy, dynasty strategy, understanding your league mates and stuff. And understanding, like, if you're in a group of people who are redraft heavy mindsets, you can really take advantage of that by looking at these things, right? Like, and like, I think that's a huge advantage that we don't always take advantage of. So just kind of throwing that out there as well. Does anybody have one they want to throw out there?
I have 2, but I did want to just quickly talk through that really quick, because I think that's a really awesome idea. And I have a terrible story about how I basically took advantage of that. Billy, you know the story, but basically I'm in a keeper league with folks that came from redraft background, and majority of them have been playing redrafts for 20 plus years. Yeah, we're old. And so we were maybe week 3 in the season. Devon Chain basically had no role in the NFL. He was not really talked about too much, and I was able to trade. It was a super flex league. Ryan Tannehill for Devon Chain, right? So
in Dynasty,
it was in keeper, but
keeper.
But Etienne was drafted in like the 12th round, so now I have a running back for potentially the next 2-3 years, whatever. Yeah. But regardless, I got rid of him for Ryan Tannehill. But basically, I think the guy ended up dropping him by the end of the season. Like it was literally like one of those types of trades that it was like so caught up in the idea of I don't know how to play super flex. I didn't properly draft the right number of quarterbacks. I took advantage of him not understanding how running back adaptation is going to work, especially into that Miami Dolphins offense. And, you find those caveats to basically maneuver around. And I do think that there is places to make value. But the one player that really stuck out to me, and I was surprised you didn't highlight him, is Derrick Henry. 77 overall in Dynasty, but he is such a redraft king that I don't, no pun intended, King Henry, sitting there at 21.
Wow, I can't believe I missed that one. That's a massive.
Like, what are our thoughts about Derrick Henry, especially in the Dynasty landscape going into 2024? Like, is he someone that we're looking to acquire as like a one-hit wonder, knowing if we're contending this year, we're willing to accept that cost? And what is that cost you're willing to accept?
I think this all ties in very nicely to the general conversation that we've been having about trading, which is that you have to know your league mates and play the micro market that you're playing Dynasty in. You can't, like, it's not always going to be the same. But my stance on Henry specifically is that I personally wouldn't throw like a random first at him. Like, I wouldn't send like a 2025 or 2026 first straight up for Henry. But if you can get him for any second, you should smash that. Like, that's awesome. He is like, when we talk about, I'll figure out my RB2 role, usually thinking about an older guy who's going to give you production for super cheap. Right now in Dynasty, Derrick Henry is the perfect. Let me spend my 2024 second on an RB2 because I'm ready to compete this year. Derrick Henry's the perfect guy to do that with, in my opinion. And I don't know, they're like cheaper. Like, you could, in my opinion, Mostert is a similar archetype where it's like, okay, this team is ready. Let me go throw my third on Mostert.
Okay, yeah.
Plug him in.
Not a second though.
Okay. Yeah. Not a second for sure. At a totally different cost, but it's that same archetype. Like, I think Connor is one of those guys. Aaron Jones is one of those guys where it's like, okay, I think this is my year. I'm ready to throw my pit, like throw some draft capital to get a pricey RB2 that's going to produce me, or not a pricey, a cheap RB2 that's going to produce like a RB1. And Henry is like just
poster
like
boy,
poster boy RB2 that you can buy for a much like a huge discounted cost right now. So I definitely think he's a buy, as long as he's not owned by another contender, because then you're probably going to have to throw a first at him. But if he's for some reason not currently on a contender, smash that. Like, absolutely.
I love that list. And let's pose this question to both of you, because I think it will answer this question. And Billy, you go first. Recently, maybe it was like probably 2.5-3 weeks ago, got an offer, James Conner and a fourth for Derrick Henry. Which side do you fall on?
I'd just keep Henry at that point. You go ahead, Billy.
I'd probably keep Henry at that point. Or
what if you have Connor?
Yeah, no, if I have Connor, I'd probably keep Connor too, dude. Like, I think I would
sideways, right?
I would just stand pat with whoever I had. Yeah. I think Derrick Henry is too high in redraft ADP, too low in Dynasty ADP. Needs to close that gap a little bit. And I agree with Ben. Like, that second round pick, I'm not willing to buy many running backs in the offseason at all. And I'm even hesitant to do this, but I think if I was a contending team and I had this on my plate and it was, my second round pick straight for Derrick Henry, like, it's really hard value to pass up. It just is production wise. So that Dynasty ADP is freaking juicy when looking at the redraft. It just feels like you can really get a discount there. And
you guys see the running back ahead of Derrick Henry in ADP, by the way. It's kind of funny.
Trey Benson. that's actually, man. Like, that's actually kind of terrible. Could you trade Trey Benson?
About. Yeah,
it just fits. Can you make that trade, like a Benson for Henry type deal?
I'd be all over that. I don't have any Benson, but I'd be all over that personally.
I think you could.
Yeah, right. I mean, ADP says you can.
Well, especially given, like, let's say that circumstance, right? Like the one that Ben spoke about. You're talking about potentially a team that's not contending. Maybe they're rebuilding. Maybe they fall into a middle branch of rebuilding. Don't know what they're doing. They're structured weird going into the season. Like, I bet you 99% of the time they want the early second round pick running back rather than a guy that they think that they won't be able to get anything more from. But this is the same conversation we had last offseason with Mike Evans, right? Mike Evans, you can't get anything more than a second for him. You can't get anything more than a second for him, blah, blah, blah. Guess what? Mike Evans was going for a late first, basically after week 6 throughout that whole second half of the season. And some folks are still selling him for a late first right now. So it just really puts things new.
Yeah, and I do think, sorry, Jake, if I cut you off there,
good.
but I do think that the idea of like, oh, you could buy Derrick Henry for a second now and flip him for a first. I think a lot of people would scoff at that, but I think what Jake's saying is exactly that. It's like, stop scoffing at that. It's very possible. And like, if he's scoring points later,
works. Yeah,
that's how this market works. And if he's scoring points later in the season and you don't need him any longer, like, it's very, very likely you're going to be able to get at least that second round pick back, right? Like, at the very least, you're going to probably be able to get what you spent back, if not more. So I mean, that's obviously always the goal in Dynasty, to make plus on any investment. And so I think if we're looking at it from that perspective, it's a great buy. So I just want to say we have some other stuff on the show sheet. We'll save it till next time. We're going to just finish off with this conversation here so that we can kind of take our time with it or whatever and just work through some of these players. Jake, you said you had another one? Or did you throw out two already?
Yeah, I did say I had two players, but for the sake of time,
you lied. All right.
Yeah.
No,
I didn't lie. I didn't lie. The second one you did have highlighted was Josh Jacobs, and he kind of falls into that weird range of running backs where I think from a productivity standpoint, people seem to be really high on him. I would say mostly non-dynasty minded folks. Mm-hmm. But yet I would say that his Dynasty ADP is relatively high for a 26-year-old running back who's already had, a 300 plus carry season. And it puts me in a perspective where I just don't know, would you acquire at cost? What's your storyline on Josh Jacobs?
Yeah, I mean,
so for you go ahead, Billy.
No, I was actually going to say, Ben, jump in there. Please go for it.
Okay. As far as Jacobs goes, so I don't know. This is the toughest RB bet to make, in my opinion, because it's like his high end of range of outcomes is like him and Saquon, in my opinion, have like a very similar current situation and like a similar ceiling because of that. I think Jacobs is a super underrated receiver, and people forget that is going to contribute to his potential production ceiling. But the low end is like Tony Pollard or something like that. Like there's just, with all of these running backs in this range, with Rashad White, Josh Jacobs, Kyron Williams, Saquon, I think all of them have an incredibly high ceiling, but a really like low floor that people are forgetting about a little bit. And obviously the ratio of ceiling to floor percentage is going to vary from each of these guys, and it's reflected in their ADP. Like Saquon is probably the least likely to end up as like a Tony Pollard, and Josh Jacobs is probably second least likely to do that, so on and so forth. But I don't know. I think the Green Bay offense is going to be really good. And I think that there's going to be a lot of points scored, and usually a running back in a high points per game offense is a good bet to make. So I have one Jacobs share that I drafted, I think, because I kind of like his ADP a little bit, but I'm not super excited about it in Dynasty, and 34 in redraft seems pretty rich for my blood for sure for him.
Yeah, I would I would take most issue with where the community views him this year. 34 overall. That's really, you said rich, but yeah, just that thinking that he has that potential upside still in that offense that I think is going to have a lot of mouths to feed in general. Just not even just speaking of the backfield situation, but you're talking about targets. They want to get these tight ends involved. Like, it's not going to all go to Jacobs like we've seen in the past on a depleted offense, right? Like, he's had the advantage of having not much around him. You know what I mean? And for a running back who is a skilled running back, like, volume is king, right? Like that's helped him out a lot. And I don't know if he's going to see that. So I'm just really concerned about the workload. We've done a little bit of research on the 300 plus carry seasons. He's had one of those. Unless your name is Derrick Henry, it doesn't look very good post 300 carry season. So I'm not excited about him at all. And then looking at the guys around him, there's plenty of players I'd rather take shots on who I think have more longevity. So very, very cautious on Jacobs. I don't think I have any shares in Dynasty across like 19 leagues. So that tells you
the guys around him. I mean,
feel about him.
Like Lad McConkey, like really? Yeah. Wow. That's like a super flex first pretty much. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I agree. It's tough to buy in. Tough to buy in at that price.
Yeah. But I mean, that's what these kind of running backs typically cost. I just when we're talking about like Henry versus Jacobs, I just feel like I feel more confident in what I'm getting out of one than the other, if that makes sense, if they're both healthy, So that's kind of how I feel about that situation.
And the redraft community agrees with you, right? Like that's an entire round ahead.
Yes.
And for me, hovering
but not
around
the Dynasty community.
Yeah, not the Dynasty community. But like if I had to place my bets, would you rather go Isaiah Pacheco or Josh Jacobs? That's Pacheco, a pretty tough question for me. But I would go Pacheco too.
I'd go Pacheco, yeah.
It's not something I want to be making the decision of, because to Ben's point before, I'm fading running backs basically everywhere I can. So I'm not making that decision.
I'm just cringing at that question. Like I don't think I have an answer. The correct answer all offseason has been no.
He's like, I don't answer these questions. Real life draft, I don't. They don't even cross his mind.
That question has not crossed my mind at a single point in any startup this offseason.
So Ben, I'm not putting you on the spot here. I promise. I don't want to leave you out if you do have specific players you want to talk about. If you don't, there are a couple more I have, but
nothing's really jumping. Nothing's jumping out at me. Everything. I think that the general theme of this conversation is that like there are certain archetypes of players that are being valued incorrectly. It's not so micro of like player to player for me. So I'm happy to just keep looking at specific examples that you guys are.
That's true, and we have. That's actually very true. I like that you pointed out, and we have stuck with a couple archetypes. So let's shift gears a little bit then, right? Let's talk about Jordan Addison. Okay, let's talk about a young wide receiver who is actually very low in redraft ADP, 82nd overall, but fairly high in Dynasty ADP, 45th overall. That's a very, very large gap. What are we missing here with this? Like, because obviously Dynasty is definitely more about this year. Redraft is saying it ain't gonna be shit this year. But should the Dynasty community still be in on him, or should we be hands off right now and trying to maybe approach him down the road, if that makes sense? What do you think about this, Ben?
Whenever I look at an ADP like this, it reminds me how powerful the echo chamber is between me, you, Jake, and some of the other guys that are in like our immediate Dynasty circle, because my general thought on Jordan Addison was that everyone was fading him. Like I didn't realize he was still going this high, but Paul over at Your Potential has been super outspoken against Jordan Addison. I pretty quickly also have sort of gotten underweight on Addison. I think you guys probably both are too. I don't want to like jump ahead of myself here, but like I do think that's where this conversation is trending towards the idea that if you have this big of a disparity, there's almost no way that his value is going to jump this season if we really do think that he's going to produce as a 7th round redraft pick. Like that's nothing to be excited about when you're picking in the 4th round or 5th round of your Dynasty draft. So yeah, I think that this reflects accurately why I'm fading him in Dynasty. I don't really know what that means for his redraft ADP. It probably should be a little higher than it is right now, but I don't play enough. I don't play any redraft anymore, so I wouldn't really know where he should be going.
A true Dynasty degenerate. No redraft anymore.
I just gave up because I think I'm bad at redraft now. Like we've been talking about how hard it is to like switch your mind when you're switching back and forth, and I've given up. I don't think I can switch my mind. I'm a Dynasty brain now. I can't. I tried, and I finished like 7th in my like one redraft league this year, and I was like, I'm not doing this shit again, bro. I'm done.
It's funny because there's I was listening to big shout Tommy V bringing on his mom on the Superflex Super Show pod. Professional poker player, absolutely amazing stuff. But they brought up like a comparison of cash poker games being redraft and tournament poker being Dynasty, and that resonated with me so much because it's like you can get bullied around in cash by like luck and people having a lot of money and stuff like it's like the tournaments are a lot more about strategy and really playing things out, right? And I think that really resonated with me, and just kind of how you were talking about
that's
that.
That's a really cool analogy.
It is, right? I literally wrote it down. I made that. The show was so good I took notes. Like that's how good it was. So highly recommend.
I love that.
But going back to Jordan Addison here, I'm just looking at guys around him like Tank Dell in Dynasty ADP. Forget anything else. In Dynasty ADP, like what in the hell are you? Well, just Higgins, anybody around there. What are you expecting out of Addison when in comparison to these other guys? Like, how can you expect the same level of, like, even in Dynasty in that round, you're expecting some level of productivity. You know what I mean? It's the 4th round. Like, you're not trying to make like future bets only here. Like, that's not what this round is for, really. So.
Yeah.
You
should be getting both rounds, for sure.
You should be getting, right. That's what I mean. You should be getting the whole package, and Addison clearly isn't fitting that mold right now. And so, yeah, totally. I understand where Paul is coming from and has been coming from this whole time. Like, just wait. We can buy him later, right? Like, we'll buy Addison when he's a round or 2 cheaper next year. That's what.
If you do want the upside swing, Kyle Pitts goes 10 picks later, apparently. So like, that's like way more upside at a more scarce position. So. If you're chasing upside, don't take Jordan Addison. If you're chasing production, don't take Jordan Addison.
I mean, if I had Jordan Addison and I could trade him straight for Kyle Pitts, I would be ecstatic. Like, that'd be incredibly, So
break my
it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So
no, it probably won't. But I think that there's opportunity there to get something like it done. You know what I mean? Like.
I can tell you, I've been trying for the last month and a half with my last Jordan Addison share, and it's been honestly impossible.
That's so strange because the market.
If you're in a league with some sharks, I could definitely see Jordan Addison being a tough guy to move off of for sure. Yeah. Like I got out as soon as I felt this coming. I had 2 Jordan Addison shares before this offseason, and I got out of both of them before the offseason ended. The Justin Jefferson injury when he exploded was just like such a like blindingly obvious sell window that I was like, even if I felt bad selling a young player who was producing, I was like F it. Like, there's no way this is a bad decision right now.
Definitely missed that window. It's a great point. The last 2 players that I did want to bring up in that same vein, Billy, that you had with Jordan Addison. I think just from like a redraft brain, Deontay Johnson seems like a pure smash at 81 compared to the 82 ADP. Like, I would take Deontay over Addison every single day of the week. And then
right here. Yeah. Okay.
And then I would also, and this is a player, I think it's really important to understand the nuances of scheme, but it's also really important to just understand pure depth chart. And I think someone like a Lad McConkey at cost at redraft makes a ton of sense as well. You're talking about a player who's hitting like low hundreds, I think it was, if I saw correctly. Where was he?
I got you. There you go. Yeah, 105.
105. Wow. So you can get him, basically 2 rounds later than Jordan Addison. Like, sign me up. I will take that every single time. So give me Deontay in the same round that I'll take Jordan Addison, and then give me Lad McConkey 2 rounds later. And I know for a fact I have supplemented any potential risk from Jordan Addison by taking 2 wide receivers that I know will produce probably better than him, but if not at his ceiling. And I think his ceiling is probably both of their relative floors, to be honest.
That McConkey one is nice. He's probably going to be the rookie wide receiver we should be targeting in redraft, right? Because he has the obvious role there for him that we want to discount because he didn't have the college production or whatever, right? Like, he didn't earn the targets in college, so he's not going to do it at the next level, which obviously that is relatively predictive. It does translate like that, I feel like, but I do think that injury, there was a lot of stuff in college contextually that impacted Lad McConkey, and I think he's in a good spot. So I think, looking at that discrepancy there, 105 in redraft to, 70, whatever, 68 in Dynasty, that's a good way to look at it for sure. And I think he's actually a pretty good pick in Dynasty, like in that range. That's a good, I think that's where he should be. So I like that. All right, I'm going to finish off last one here, and we'll get out of here. Christian Kirk. I want to talk about this a little bit because I do feel like the situation in Jacksonville is not like really this. It's not really bad for Christian Kirk. We have a rookie wide receiver there, which I think is skewing the perspective a little bit. But Ben, do you think with Brian Thomas Jr. still being there, that we're a little, or not still being there, with Brian Thomas Jr. entering the fold in Jacksonville, do you think we're a little low on Christian Kirk? He's sitting at 59 in redraft ADP, 76 in Dynasty.
59 feels pretty good for him, honestly, at least in redraft. Like, I don't think that that's like far off where I would like want to take a guy like Kirk. And then in Dynasty, I think he's like about properly weighted right now in a sense, like in just like a general range sense, but Kirk at cost versus like Addison at cost, just to use that example that we were just on, crazy. Like I would so much rather have Kirk. Kirk will probably outproduce Addison. Like, it's a similar situation. You have Lawrence, good young quarterback, just got a bag, obviously, and then a bunch of like other talented players in that offense. Ingram, Brian Thomas, Gabe Davis is going to take targets, like whether you like it or not, he just will. But they all complement Kirk's skill set pretty well. I think the Ingram is probably his biggest competition as far as like the similar level of depth that they work in the best. So I'm not like crazy high on Kirk. I don't think he's like screaming value, but I do think he's a good value. And then Addison, you think, is a pretty similar bet. He's also probably not the top target earner. Maybe Kirk could be the top target earner, but obviously Jefferson's a lot better than Brian Thomas Jr. But similar, like on like maybe a lesser part of a stacked offense with a young quarterback. Kirk is obviously just the much cheaper option, and in my opinion, way better at cost. I really also like the Deontay pull was amazing. Like that, he is so undervalued right now. The fact that you could be drafting Addison in like the 5th in Dynasty and then Deontay in like the 9th, it's crazy. You can pretty much get this. You will get the same or better production out of Deontay, and you can add like a McBride or like a Pitts to your tight end slot by spending your 5th round pick elsewhere. So,
I love that. Yeah,
I love that pull.
Yeah, and the funny thing about Deontay is everybody apparently feels the same about him. Like redraft and Dynasty, they're like, yeah, this guy sucks, I guess, fade him. But I think that is just a complete misevaluation. Yes. Complete misevaluation by the community. I think that a lot of people are gonna regret fading him this year. So
he's just a better football player than people seem to think. Like, people are forgetting that he's like in my opinion, one of the better route runners in the whole league.
Yes,
absolutely.
People are acting like he's just like another 10 point per game guy. He's not. Like, Deontay Johnson is not just a guy. Like, he is a really good football player in my opinion.
I also feel like we're doing the thing where we're discounting, almost like the Houston Texans thing again, where we're like, they've always sucked. They're going to suck. It doesn't really matter what happens, or they just suck. But it's like, this team is doing a lot. Like Dave Canales, like adding a bunch of weapons. Deontay, Leggett, Brooks.
Bryce Young was the first overall pick, bro. Like, he's like a real legit quarterback for sure.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm getting at. Is I think we're underselling the potential of this offense to get right a little bit, and I think that everybody in Carolina might be a potential buy. Like, obviously, you got to look at the market and look at cost, but I just think we should be buying into when the market goes one way, sometimes you want to go the other. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And I think the market's gone too far one way with Carolina, and I think we need to start, pushing in the other direction if we want to, gain an edge there. So, just my last thing on Kirk, I do think that this is one of those situations where we are misevaluating expectations, maybe, or we don't have the right expectations here, because I don't understand why we're like Kirk. Nothing has changed about Kirk, really, right? He's the same guy. But it seems to be that we are pushing him down a bit. And I don't know if, I think you're right. He's kind of properly priced within the pool of players. So he might just be a guy that you can maybe send a late second or something like that. Like, get him for just cheap pick value along the way for a contending team. Like, I do see him as that kind of player. But this was just one of those situations where I think we're looking at it and we're like, we expect him to be worse because they brought in Brian Thomas Jr. And that logic doesn't line up to me. Like, it doesn't work that way, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. If I had Christian Kirk in my flex slot right now, I'd feel ecstatic. Like, that's kind of where I want him. It's like, I don't want to be relying on Christian Kirk for like game winning production from week to week, but just having him in with giving me like a 10 to potentially 18 points per week. That sounds fantastic to me.
Absolutely. Awesome. All right. Well, with that, we're going to wrap up the Dynasty versus Redraft ADP discussion. We're actually going to wrap up the show here. So just want to thank you, Ben, so much for joining us. This was such a blast. I'm really glad we could introduce you to our listeners, and we're obviously going to have you back on. There's some stuff we didn't get to talk about, and there's obviously going to be a ton of stuff I want to talk to you about along the way. So go give him a follow at bwinknfl on Twitter. You can find all of his work at Dynasty Football Factory. Is there anywhere else, anything else you want to tell the listeners where to find you, what you're doing, what you got going on?
If you're on TikTok, definitely find me. Same username as on Twitter, but I'm going to try to get that more active this offseason, and that's where a lot of my takes are going to end up probably. But everything is on Twitter. That's where I'm always going to be the most active, and that's where I think the real rich Dynasty discourse happens on Twitter and in Discords. Obviously.
Yeah, shout out to Ben to shouting out the New York Giants offense and their wide receiver game coming up this upcoming season. I think your breakdown, honestly, with how that offense is specifically kind of just tailored to the Buffalo Bills, not to give away too much content, really is pretty astute stuff. So just want to say spot on. Great content.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. So more of that will be over up on my TikTok, and then there's always going to be similar takes circulating my Twitter. But yeah, that's where I like to go talk ball.
Yeah. And lastly, just to echo Jake and what I said already, Ben, not just a great Dynasty player, Dynasty mind, real NFL, like football, really sharp. Like, dude, like he understands the game and he dissects it really well. So I just want to give you your flowers a little bit on the way out for that. I really, really respect what you do, and I enjoy listening and digesting your content. So everybody else should do the same. Absolutely. Last thing, really, the last thing I want to say is I do want to thank any of the new subs we have to the YouTube channel. We've been seeing those trickle in. It's been really great. We've been spending quite a bit of time prepping for our guests on the main show and all that, but we do have some ideas cooking up for the YouTube content. We're really prepping for those, trying to take some time to prep and get those out there and make the best quality possible. So thank you for sticking with us. Really appreciate it. And yeah, just stay tuned and appreciate you coming along the journey with us. That'll do it for us. Thank you everybody for joining the show, and we'll catch you next time. Peace out.